what should Christians think about things like cloning and stem cell research?
We'll apply biblical truth to those topics today on Creation Magazine Live.
Welcome to Creation Magazine Live. My name's Richard Fangrad.
And I'm Calvin Smith.
Now this week on Creation Magazine Live, our topic is stem cells and cloning, the stem cell research and cloning. Now both of those technologies have been around for quite a while now, and they often generate controversy. What is the biblical response that Christians should be taking regarding these kinds of things?
Right, as a ministry that employs, as far as we know, the most PhD scientists of any Christian ministry globally, we often get asked science-related questions. And even though our main focus as a ministry is on the science associated with the Bible's creation account, Christians have asked us questions involving stem cells and cloning over the years. So today we'll explain what these things are and then see how to understand them from a biblical worldview. Right.
Now let's start with cloning. Way back on July 5th, 1996, the first successful mammal clone was born. Dolly the sheep has been called the world's most famous sheep. A book about this, published a year later, had this to say about it. The lamb has always been a symbol of innocence. This changed abruptly in the spring of 1997. Dolly, a barely 3-month-old sheep, hit the headlines, displacing politicians and pop stars from the front pages of newspapers and magazines. Overnight, the fluffy white lamb of innocence had become a symbol of threat to the human society through an eerie new technology, cloning.
Right, so how did this scientific breakthrough happen? Well, she was cloned by Sir Ian Wilmot, Keith Campbell, and colleagues at the Raslin Institute, part of the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and the biotechnology company PPL Therapeutics, based near Edinburgh. So Wilmot's experiment involved 3 adult female sheep. He first took an udder cell from a sheep A, we'll call it, a 6-year-old of the Finn Dorset breed. He then fused the genetic information in its nucleus with an egg cell from sheep B, from which the nucleus had been removed. And tiny electric shocks were used to get this new combination egg cell to divide, and the resultant embryo was implanted into the womb of sheep C, where it developed just like any other sheep embryo.
All right, 150 days later, Dolly became the first sheep to be born without a father. And that was quite a breakthrough. But how do we judge cloning according to the Bible? In answering, we need to give just a little bit more background. Let's do that.
Yeah, you know, the cells in a living being, whether it's in the skin, the lungs, the nose, or elsewhere, have a complete set of genetic instructions known as the genome. And so from the very first division of the fertilized egg, the nucleus of every cell stores the complete genetic information.
Right. At a very early stage in embryonic development, the cells specialize or differentiate so that some become nerve cells, some skin cells, bone cells, etc. Each performs different functions based on different parts of the genetic code. That part of the genome which is not needed for specialized function of a gland cell, for example, it isn't lost, but it's rather switched off or asleep, if you want to think of it that way.
Right. So in 1996, Wilmot succeeded in awakening the hidden information of the nucleus of such a cell from its slumber, we should say. Dolly is a copy, it's a clone of the sheep whose udder cell was used. So a clone is an individual, plant, animal, or human being derived by asexual reproduction from another organism that has the identical genetic code.
Right, but in spite of the fact that clones have the same genotype, they're never absolutely identical. The way an individual develops depends a lot on the surroundings. This is unlike science fiction stories where, for example, the bad guys make a clone from the DNA of an evil genius, and of course he turns out to be an evil genius.
Yeah.
Your DNA doesn't determine all of your actions. That's not how it works. It's good for movies, but
we should keep in mind too that cloning that's not actually a human invention.
Right. Right.
You know, the creator himself planned this way of reproduction. For example, when we plant potato tubers of the previous year, the potatoes we later harvest are just as nutritious and tasty, and this is because because there's no new combination of hereditary information. The new potatoes weren't pollinated with the DNA of another. They are in fact clones of the previous year's plant.
Right, yeah. Strawberries are also propagated from runners, which are actually clones of the parent plant, bearing fruit with the same color and taste.
That's right. So we also see cloning in the animal kingdom. Aphids can reproduce both sexually and by cloning. In spring, the first aphid generation hatches out of the fertilized eggs, but later the aphid lays eggs that start to divide without being fertilized. So they're clones of the mother.
Right. Many other animals reproduce by cloning, certain bees, ants, crustaceans, and lizards. And we'll talk about cloning people when we get back in just a minute.
Many people think DNA is like a recipe or an ordered set of instructions. This is far too simplistic because genomes operate in multiple dimensions. The first dimension is the sequence of DNA letters. Unlike a book, these DNA letters can be read in different ways. For example, each part of a gene can be used in constructing multiple different proteins, a process controlled by other parts of the genome, the second dimension. Then we must consider the arrangement of the DNA in the nucleus, where genes are not randomly distributed, but clustered together according to the need. The third dimension. Even more impressively, the chromosomes in the nucleus vary in shape according to the cell's changing needs over time. The fourth dimension. How could genomes operating in multiple dimensions have evolved? A rare beneficial mutation that might enhance things in one dimension would likely cause problems at other levels. Genomes look more and more like the handiwork of a supremely intelligent programmer.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
If you just tuned in this week, we're talking about cloning and stem cells, right or wrong. We've given you some background information about cloning animals. Now, let's talk about cloning people.
Okay, well, first off, human clones have always been here. Identical twins are real clones. The fertilized egg splits into two, and each of these two daughter cells develops separately. They are individual people with an absolutely identical set of genes.
Right, but in spite of this, they are two different people.
Yes.
Each of them experiences the world in a unique way, and each is uniquely molded by his or her individual experiences and choices, and both have their own personality and their own soul.
Right, so is humanity allowed to use the cloning technique? Humans are appointed rulers over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth, as it says in Genesis 1:28. So there's no reason why it shouldn't be used in plants and animals, especially where there is a benefit to mankind, such as less hunger or disease. Christ's example indicates that things like healing or binding wounds or peacemaking or feeding the hungry, for example, which oppose the effects of the cursed, are blessed. That's the way they're labeled.
Now, when humans breed wheat that can be cultivated in cold areas or use artificial selection to get cows yielding more milk, we're also manipulating nature. But of course, few would or should oppose such intervention. It follows that God's instruction to humans to subdue the earth in Genesis 1:28, could also allow for cloning.
Right. The worldwide fear of cloning derives from a kind of vague and confused anxiety about a technology that seems out of control. Back in 1997, that was the year after Dolly was born, an article in the German magazine Der Spiegel said this: biologists and doctors anywhere in the world could hit upon the idea of generating genetically identical copies of geniuses, top-class athletes, artists, or movie stars. The person off the shelf, or Homo Xerox, would no longer be mere fiction. Even Hitlers and Stalins could be produced in labs of biomodelers if only one usable cell of theirs could be found.
Well, actually, that's not going to happen.
No.
There's a section in the article by Dr. Werner Gitt on cloning titled, "Would a Clone of Lenin Be Another Lenin?"
Right.
And he writes this: while unlikely, the mummified body of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin might still provide a complete genetic blueprint of his DNA. What if someone with sufficient technology were to use this to make a clone of the father of the Russian Revolution?
He continues, many people are unaware that Lenin was one of the most bloodthirsty tyrants of this whole evolutionized century. And he's talking here about the 20th century. A recent Time article said his total ruthlessness was a model for Stalin, Mao, Hitler, and Pol Pot. It cites one of the key Soviet dissidents of the era as stating that from Lenin's neat pen flowed seas of blood.
A clone of Lenin would not necessarily give rise to a similarly murderous individual. The interaction of his identical genetic blueprint with the countless differences in his environment and opportunity means that Lenin's hypothetical offspring would likely be very different from his parent.
Right, and he continues, as a human being, he would have a unique soul. He could make his own choices in all manner of areas, including rejecting the evolutionism which turned Lenin into a mass killing machine. He might even become a born-again believer in the risen Lord Jesus. So while not justifying human cloning, common fears about armies of identical, ruthless dictators lack a factual basis.
Right. So hopefully that brings some clarity to some of the fears that about human cloning. But there are legitimate fears of human cloning that do actually need to be addressed.
Right. A major reason for this fear is that in today's evolutionized world, there's no dividing line between the animal kingdom and humans. And often the same criteria, the same ethical standards are applied to both. The Bible, on the other hand, draws a clear line between animals and humans and gives ethical guidelines.
Right, now we're going to continue with this after the break, but if you want more information, read the article Cloning, Right or Wrong at creation.com/cloning-right or wrong with dashes in between. And much of the content of this show comes from that article that was published in Creation magazine way back in 1998.
For a more in-depth understanding of topics relating to the creation-evolution debate, the Journal of Creation contains peer-reviewed research papers that support the biblical account of creation, the flood, and the fall. One subscriber said, "I always assumed that this journal would be too academic for me." Not so. I am a Christian with a very inquiring mind. With each issue, I find powerful articles that open doors and shine light on my understanding of the world. Each Journal of Creation is more than 120 pages and published 3 times a year. To subscribe, visit creation.com.
All right, on this week's episode, we're talking about cloning and stem cells. Now, we'll get to the bottom of the bottom line about cloning shortly, and then we'll move on to understand stem cell research in the light of the Bible.
Right. One of the biblical reasons human cloning is wrong is that humans were created separately in God's image, unlike the animal kingdom. So humans exist beyond physical death. We're eternal creatures, and you can read about that in Luke 16:19-31, Philippians 1:23, and many other places. And nowhere is this indicated for animals.
Right, yeah. God allowed humans to kill animals in Genesis 9:2-3, but concerning other humans, God gave the commandment, "You shall not murder." That's in Exodus 20, where the 10 Commandments are given.
Right. And also, God entrusted humans with dominion over the animal kingdom in Genesis 1:26, but humans were never told to have dominion over other humans, nor manipulate them as they, would be the case if you were to clone a human.
Right, yeah. Furthermore, humans are meant to have fathers and mothers to be the offspring of a sacred marriage relationship. The family is ordained by God. But of course, circumstances in our fallen world mean that children sometimes have to be raised by only one parent, but a clone could never have 2 parents. Thus, the artificial cloning of a complete human being is opposed to biblical principles because it deliberately sets out to cause such a situation.
Right, and there are further reasons for rejecting the artificial cloning of humans. Each fertilized egg, including those from cloning, is a new human individual. But perfecting the cloning technique requires many experiments, and many individuals would be enabled to start life only to be deliberately destroyed, and killing innocent humans is murder.
Right, the research director of a biotechnology firm said this: "My own view is that the research," he's talking about human cloning, "is immoral at the present time and should always be immoral. To make the technique more efficient would require a great deal of experimentation, and to get this more refined would be at the expense of having deformed babies, etc. To get it to a situation where you could clone humans efficiently would have such a history of misery associated with it."
So, while it might be right under some circumstances to clone animals to benefit people, it's absolutely wrong to try to clone humans.
Right. So let's move on to stem cells. What are stem cells? As an embryo grows, different cells in different places have to specialize, so only certain instructions are executed. The cells become differentiated, as we said before. Bone cells develop where bone is needed. Skin, nerve, muscle, brain cells, etc. develop where they are needed. All of the instructions on the DNA are there, but in the case of bone cells, for example, it has been turned off somehow, except for the instructions that say, make bone.
Right. However, stem cells are undifferentiated to some degree, and because they're like embryonic cells in that many of their instructions haven't been turned off, so they have the potential to grow into many types of tissue.
Right. Many researchers have high hopes that they could be used to regrow damaged tissue, for example. They hope that it could help things like Parkinson's disease, insulin-dependent or type 1 diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, and to repair nerves damaged by spinal injuries, for example.
Stem cells can be found in embryos and in adults, and to create an embryonic stem cell line, a human embryo must be killed and its stem cells removed. All existing stem cell lines have been created with leftover embryos from fertility treatments, and many people think that because they probably never would be implanted, that we might as well use them for stem cell research.
Yeah. But like human cloning, it would involve the killing of little people. So embryonic stem cell experiments are clearly wrong. On the other hand, there have been huge successes recently that are the result of using adult stem cells. Well over 70 cures have resulted from adult stem cell technology, and the list continues to grow.
Right. You can see a chart here listing various different categories and specific successes. Different types of cancer have been treated using adult stem cells, heart damage, the cornea of eyes have been regenerated, all kinds of autoimmune diseases and neural diseases and injuries have been treated, blood conditions, wounds like replacing jawbone and skull have resulted from adult stem cells.
But embryonic stem cells have yet to produce a single effective cure for any disease. However, even if it did produce cures that have been promised from them, embryonic stem cell research would still be immoral,
right,
because it destroys human life. And we'll continue with more of that in just a minute.
What do marine fossils on the top of Mount Everest tell us about the biblical flood? Well, we find fossils of marine creatures in limestone near the summit, which means that this area must have been under the sea in the past. Everyone agrees that the top of Everest was once under the sea. However, many people do not associate these rocks and fossils with Noah's flood because they think there is not enough water to cover the highest mountains. However, they are not considering how the flood changed the Earth's topography. The mountain ranges formed at the end of the flood. With vertical earth movements towards the end of the flood, the mountains rose and the water flowed off the continents into the newly formed ocean basins. Indeed, such mountains must have formed quickly and recently, otherwise they would have eroded as quickly as they formed. That's why we have marine fossils at the top of high mountains.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
So our subject this week is human cloning and stem cells. And you know, like we just showed, it's amazing how many medical breakthroughs have been made with adult stem cells. And this leads to the question, what's the advantage of using embryonic stem cells? Why not just keep using adult stem cells?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that question is answered in the FAQ section of the USA's the website for the National Institute of Health. It says this: human embryonic stem cells are thought to have a much greater developmental potential than adult stem cells. This means that embryonic stem cells may be pluripotent, that is, able to give rise to cells found in all tissues of the embryo except for the germ cells, rather than being multipotent, restricted to specific subpopulations of cell types, as adult stem cells are thought to be. However, a newer type of reprogrammed adult cells called induced pluripotent stem cells has proven to be pluripotent.
So it was thought that the embryonic cells might be better, but that's not actually the case.
Right.
You know, newer research suggests that adult stem cells can also be pluripotent. By the way, a multipotent stem cell means it can develop into different types of tissue, and pluripotent stem cells can develop into any body part, but not the whole organism.
Right, yeah. Also, these induced pluripotent adult stem cells are cheaper than embryonic stem cells while remaining relatively easy to produce, rendering embryonic stem cells inefficient and more expensive comparatively.
And you can get adult stem cells from all over the body.
Yeah.
Probably the best sort of source of stem cells is liposuction fat. Researchers have grown cartilage, muscle, and more fat cells from such stem cells, depending on the nutrients in which the cells were grown.
Right. An abundant source of stem cells is the umbilical cord, which has already proven themselves in treating leukemia, stem cells from there. A more recent discovery was that stem cells from umbilical cord blood were injected into mice which had suffered strokes, and they affected a 50% recovery in brain tissues. Quite amazing. Professor
Alan Mackay-Sim, awarded 2003 Queenslander of the Year for his promising research into adult stem cells from the nose, says, adult olfactory stem cells are readily obtained from the nose and relatively easy to grow and multiply in the lab. In a few weeks, we can make plenty of cells for transplantation. The article says these adult olfactory stem cells appear to have the same ability as embryonic stem cells in giving rise to many different cell types, but have the advantage that they can be obtained from all individuals, even older people who might be most in need to stem cell therapies. And continued, stem cells obtained from and transplanted into the same person would not be rejected by the immune system. Well, that's a huge advantage over embryonic stem cells. If your own stem cells are used to regrow damaged tissue, there's no rejection issue. Yeah. In the case of an Israeli boy who was injected with embryonic stem cells by Russian doctors, that highlights the dangers of the treatment with embryonic stem cells. Embryonic stem cells are less stable. In the case of the Israeli boy, the injections caused tumors in his spine and his brain. Right, and you contrast that to the case of Claudio Castillo, a 30-year-old mother of two in Barcelona whose life was saved by new adult stem cell treatment. She was given a new windpipe made from her own stem cells, not embryonic ones. That's amazing. Yeah. Here's a picture showing 4 steps, just a neat little picture, 4 steps to regrowing a damaged cornea. The cornea is the clear lens at the front of your eye. So step 1 there in the picture says, you get stem cells from the good eye, you grow them on a contact lens for 10 days, then place the contact lens in the damaged eye for about 3 weeks, and step 4 says, so you see it there, stem cells heal damage to the cornea and sight improves quickly. Sight quickly improves. Amazing. Isn't that amazing? There was an article in Medscape magazine from December 2014 titled "Stem Cell Therapy May Someday Replace Corneal Transplants." Cool. And that's amazing. And it highlights the value of stem cell research. Geneticist David Prentice, who teaches life science at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, says, adult stem cell research has already shown itself to be extremely promising for treating numerous degenerative diseases, such as heart disease, stroke, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and diabetes. Adult stem cells have been shown in animal models to repair heart damage, provide therapeutic benefit for stroke, and reverse diabetes. And adult stem cells have already been used successfully in human patients to relieve lupus, multiple sclerosis, and arthritis, to name a few. That's amazing. Martin Grompe, professor of molecular medical genetics at Oregon Health Sciences University, reinforced this point when he was commenting on another study. He said, this would suggest that maybe you don't need any type of fetal stem cells at all, that our adult bodies continue to have stem cells that can do all this stuff. Right. Great. Now, there's a lot more details, many more amazing medical breakthroughs as a result of adult stem cells in a fairly long article at creation.com, Stem Cells and Genesis. And we'll be right back.
Are you skeptical about Christianity? Perhaps you're a Christian but know someone who won't consider Christianity. Christianity for Skeptics is one of CMI's most popular books. Written by Drs. Steve Kumar and Jonathan Sarfati, this powerful resource refutes many attacks on the Christian faith. It contains cutting-edge research, solid theology, and a summary of the Christian roots of science. Questions about Islam, atheism, suffering, evidence for God, and more are answered. Full of bright, catchy illustrations and a sleek modern style, this book draws in any reader. Purchase this resource and many others at creation.com.
Okay, let's summarize the issues regarding stem cells. Now, let's start with the scientific issues.
Okay, stem cells are those with the potential to form many different types of tissue. They're found not only in embryos, but in many types of non-embryonic and even adult tissues.
Their potential for growing many types of tissue means that they show promise for treating many types of diseases and disabilities. The best treatments to date are from non-embryonic stem cells, and the best source so far is liposuction fat. There you go.
Yeah, no lack of that. Conversely, embryonic cells have had no successes, and experiments have shown potential dangers including tissue rejection, which isn't an issue for adult stem cells that come from the patient.
Yeah, bonus. And let's also summarize the ethical issues. Firstly, the Bible teaches that humanity starts at the beginning of creation, at the beginning of biological life. Since murder, intentional killing of human life is wrong, it follows that embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and induced abortions are wrong because they all involve intentional killing of humans.
Right. Genesis 2:7 does not support the view that the human embryo does not have a soul or humanity. Although it seems to be changing, the successes of adult stem cell treatment have largely been overlooked.
Justifying the killing of embryos for medical or research benefits will help to dehumanize them in the eyes of the public, and it is, and perpetuate the idea that one class of humans is expendable.
Right, so there we have it. We've covered a lot of ground in today's show on cloning and stem cells. And for more details, there's a whole section on the website that's a collection of our key articles on stem cells and cloning. And you can just go to creation.com/cloning and you can find just a wealth of material there. It's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing that with all of the advances that have been, the medical advances that have been made with adult stem cells, that you could ask the question, and maybe you are, why bother with embryonic stem cells at all?
Absolutely. And, many times when you are having the discussion with people, you get this kind of, heart-wrenching tale of somebody that's, maybe has their spine broken and well, are you saying we were going to stop research to prevent this person from getting, and you pointed out, well, yeah, you've got to kill people in order to get these embryonic stem cells. So even though that's a heartbreaking condition, you're not going to kill one person to relieve somebody else. But then that's usually where they go. But when you actually look at the research, it hasn't been successful anyway. So you're much better off just continuing along the path of adult stem cells. You don't have the moral issue at all, and it's better.
Yeah, the list of successes with adult stem cells, like we had the chart up there before, is growing all the time. That article, we keep updating and adding new research successes. But,
right.
Amazing.
Yep.
It's kind of a fun topic to talk about and controversial. Of course, that's where we live as a ministry, I guess, in controversy. But if you want more of that kind of information, get the magazine, Creation Magazine. This is Creation Magazine Live.
Yep.
Creation Magazine, you can view a free digital copy online. You can flip through the pages online, go to creation.com/freemag, check it out. If you like it, subscribe. Just go to creation.com, you subscribe yourself up there, and you can get the print and the digital version. Next week on Creation Magazine Live, how can a good God allow evil in the world? That's a big question. We'll see you next week.